My name's Fiona Cornelia, and very privileged to be here today and helping with the process of this wonderful session, which is very richly inclusive of a range of wonderful speakers. I want to thank you for joining, and we all know that people's working and volunteering lives are very busy, very challenging sometimes. There's so much going on in the housing space, but to create a space like this where we can explore such an important topic, and we appreciate everybody giving their time to do so. This event is hosted by Housing for the Aged Action Group, the Housing Older Women's Movement, and Q Shelter to discuss the latest trends and responses to the crisis in older women's housing in Queensland. I do want to make a shout out to Kobe Magdalene. Kobe, as you know, has moved on from working with Haag, but over the years that we did work together, I just found her advice and her calm demeanour and incredible commitment to the issues really very much valued at Q Shelter, and I know by the Housing Older Women movement as well. So it's a shout out to Kobe for all of the work she did as she was kind of, moving on to her next professional adventure to help a forum like this happen, among all the other things that she did. It's really important that we begin as well by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on the various places that we meet from today, and I want to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Queensland Shelter works very closely with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Housing Queensland organisations, and when we know that so many of the organisations throughout the state funded by various levels of government are working with a disproportionate number of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who experience homelessness or the risk of homelessness. It's such an important thing to contextualise our acknowledgement, to say that all of our combined collective work to address housing need must always be mindful of the incredible importance of prioritising and assisting in ways that overcome the historical challenges that people face in terms of their housing journey. There's a little bit of housekeeping. I'll move through it very quickly. We are using Zoom, as you all know, so we suggest you use the speaker view in your settings, which will let you see the speaker more clearly. Questions and comments will be made via the chat function, and these will be fed through to me and to other speakers and to the event organisers as a way of us picking up on those questions. It's my intention to try and get through as many of them as we possibly can. So please keep feeding the chat, and between us we will monitor that and make as much space as we can for questions. Everybody here is committed to working on solutions to these really challenging problems, which is why I know that everyone's also committed to their contributions being respectful and in line with any reasonable code of conduct. So I know that we'll all be working to listen to each other, to respect what we hear even if we disagree with it, and to make as much space for each other to say and respond to things to deepen the understanding of the issues, but also help us all progress towards solutions. And also we are recording this event, and if you don't want to be seen on the screen, which is tempting for me to turn myself off, but I know in this role I can't. But if you don't want to be seen, we really respect that. Just you can turn off your own video if that's what you prefer. So we have a really full agenda. I'll just explain how we're going to run it. So the first session, a very warm welcome to Tracy Adams from the Housing Older Women Movement. Tracy has lived experience, perspective through lived experience, and she's also a part of the Housing Older Women Movement. We're going to hear some of the latest trends in terms of the census from Fiona York and Wendy Stone. Then Madonna Cuthbert and colleagues will be talking to the Queensland Housing and Homelessness Action Plan, responses for older women. We're going to hear from Naomi Overton from Footprints, from the Housing Older Women Support Service, quite newly funded in Queensland. And then we're going to leave as much time as we possibly can for questions and conversation. So on that note, given that we are just a few minutes behind in the agenda, I want to invite Tracy Adams to speak. Tracy is a community advocate with lived experience of housing stress, and she's also part of the Housing Older Women Movement. And just by way of explanation, the Housing Older Women Movement was formed in 2019 by women with lived experience of housing stress and homelessness, and works to advance solutions to the housing crisis as it impacts older women. It's been a very wonderful part of Q Shelter's journey that we've been on some of that journey with the Housing Older Women movement, and it's a great pleasure to welcome Trace to be the first speaker in the lineup. Thank you, Trace.
Thanks, Fiona. Just want to say I'm coming to you from Jinnabara country in Maleny, southeast Queensland, home of Bunya Pines. It's about 90 kilometres north of Brisbane, where I've been living for the last 27 years. I apologise in advance for my neighbour's barking dog, and also the internet here is fairly slow, so if it starts to get interrupted, I may need to turn off my video. So another kind of thing straight up is, since I entered into severe housing stress 3 years ago, I've been having panic attacks, which fortunately I've learned how to kind of manage. But if I start to feel one, I may take a pause and breathe into my mask, which really helps. So don't get freaked out, it happens. Yeah. So I'm 62. I've been actually homeless in a couple of different times in my life. When I was in my 20s, it was kind of fun. You could live in a car and camp and stay with friends. And as a single parent with a high needs child, it was less fun. And as an older woman with a number of disabilities, it's extremely not fun. I was quite anxious about taking this on and almost pulled out. Partly, I've never felt comfortable public speaking. I'm Asperger's and very introverted. But in trying to prepare for this over the last few weeks, and I also started seeing a new psychologist, I found confronting my own story, which I'm very, very aware of, was actually extremely triggering, and I have been on suicide watch. And please don't be alarmed, but I want you to know the impact, the real impact. And I grew up and have had a professional career, and my sense of worth has been really very much linked to being highly competent, high achieving, and being together. And so being visible in this way is, I can't tell you how challenging it is. So professional career in environmental science. I've worked in all levels of government and in community. I also have been a community activist since I was 18, working in social justice for Indigenous people, for peace, anti-war, anti-nuclear and environment. And also since I was 21, in running trainings for other activists and social change agents in how to do peaceful non-violent change, campaigning, non-violent direct action, and that thread has continued throughout my life. When I was 28 and doing a PhD with, at that time, the biggest ever federal government research grant for environmental science, I got very ill and basically collapsed and spent a year in bed, and have struggled with illness since then. Because I've been so passionate and driven about making a difference, it's been the commonest theme in my life is showing up to care for others and to care for the planet. I have managed, at various times to overcome that illness and do some fantastic work. When I had to move 3 years ago and sorting through all my boxes and files, I was even staggered looking at all the output and of good that I've done in my life to help the planet and future generations. I've always had a very strong sense of responsibility to future generations, and that has shifted over from an environment to climate change to housing. I'm extremely concerned about intergenerational housing, along with housing for everybody. Just take a breath. So since 28, I've continued to work professionally, but pretty much every time I've taken on a very serious full-time job, I've ended up collapsing again. And the last time that happened coincided with becoming pregnant. And in order to keep the baby, to have a successful pregnancy, I had to stop work. And I managed to get well and have a live, healthy baby, and had a fantastic work from home federal government contract, like doing work I loved. I even had my own personal research assistant based in Canberra. It was perfect, situation for a single mum. And when my son was 3, my then fiance, who I had spent a very long time checking out because I really wanted to make a really fantastic family for my son, I walked on him sexually abusing my young son. And both my son and I basically, I just say that I had a nervous breakdown, and both my son and I were diagnosed with severe PTSD and anxiety issues. I had not long since moved to Mullaney. I moved there because it was a small, progressive country town. I'd been doing remote area work with First Nations people in Central Australia, my most favourite and beloved work, and which I thought I'd go back to. So I wasn't well known. I didn't have support. And many people in the town chose to believe him that I was mad and made it up. And I think I did go mad for a while. And my perfectly healthy, outgoing, confident, sunny child changed overnight into extreme anxiety and regressed in language, in toileting, in everything, and would scream in terror anytime he couldn't see me, even in the same house. And that went on for many, many years. So I struggled with extreme depression and anxiety for about 7 years, and he had extreme social and learning difficulties. Because of his needs, I was very determined to try and give him the best life possible, and be a good example. So I got every possible kind of help and self-help for him and for me. And when he went to school, he was so anxious I had to go with him. So I ended up working as a teacher's aide to be in the classroom with him until he was in grade 5 and was okay to have me not in the classroom. He needed a lot of support all through school. He tried to commit suicide twice in grade 12. In that time when he was young, it's when I first applied. Oh, by the way, we were living in rental housing by then, and because I could only work part-time and in jobs that had some flexibility so I could be available to him, it meant that I was living on very little income and still, trying to really give him the best life and rent decent places. And rental housing is insecure. For anyone out there, it's insecure. And it's even harder to find flatmates when you're a single mum with a pretty off-the-planet kind of child. I still did a lot of work. I tutored at Sunshine Coast University, which I love, in environmental science. I love tutoring, and worked for local land care groups. I also did cleaning and gardening and bush regeneration and anything I could do to earn money, both to earn money and for my own self-esteem, but also for my son to be a good role model. And taking him with me. I was still an activist. I was still going to meetings and on the board of different community organisations, and he'd be going to meetings with me and strapped onto me and speaking on a stage on my hip and all over the place. So he grew up with an activist single mum. But it was fucking tough, I can't tell you. But anyway, in that time, I first applied for public housing. I was told that I wasn't eligible because I was working part-time. Every time we moved, the impact on both of us. Oh, by the way, my son was diagnosed with Asperger's as well, it's an epigenetic thing, and his ASD was switched on by the trauma of the sexual abuse. So stuck in, I still feel like I've been someone who's fallen through the cracks at every single time I've tried to get help from social workers, from Centrelink, from public housing. I'm not quite disabled enough, or not quite in a hard enough situation. You know, I had couches to surf on. I wasn't actually homeless. So the third time I applied for public housing was when I lost my rental 3 years ago. Same thing. We won't even put you on a wait list. The wait lists are so large, unless you're more severely mentally and physically disabled and at risk of domestic violence and living in a car, we won't even put you on the wait list. Yeah, so that's when I started having panic attacks. Okay, the last time I had a big physical collapse was 5 years ago. I had done so much inner work and outer work. I was doing really well. My son, I managed to get him through university and into work with a great deal of support. He was doing well. I started taking on more and more work, both paid and, again, unpaid, because I'm a passionate activist. And I collapsed again. And, you know, by then I knew what to do to get myself out of it, all the holistic healthcare and everything else. And then I was, believe it or not, a victim of a hit and run car accident, which crushed my foot and damaged the left side of my body. Initially, I was told I'd never walk again and would lose my foot, but fairly miraculously, I managed to keep my foot, and with a lot of rehab, which I paid for because I didn't get insurance because it was hit and run, I've managed to walk again. Just in the same, I had my last reconstructive surgery on my foot. So this is by now 3 years of not walking and being on my back in a bed and in wheelchairs, and paying for my rehab myself out of my savings. I had in the same week that I had my last surgery was when COVID was hit, when the affordable rental that I had was sold and I was out of a home. So here I was in a wheelchair, homeless, friends not available to help me or come around because they were so freaked out about COVID. I couldn't even make my own meals. My then partner, who'd already left me because the relationship didn't handle being completely nursed for months at a time after each surgery, stayed to look after me because no one else would, and it was an extremely fraught situation. So then I became homeless, and I did some couch surfing, and then had got money out of my super, as you could do during COVID. And when I moved into this, the only flat I could find with stairs, which I had to crawl up because I couldn't walk, and my super ran out last year, and I have since been subsidising my basic living costs, food, petrol, internet, with credit card. So I'm paying 60% of my income on rent. And what I've got to say is the impact is, you know, people, I've dealt with some really hard shit in my life. There was violence and sexual abuse growing up, and people used to say to me, "You're incredible, you're so resilient." And each knock, the getting sick, the earlier abuse, the high needs child, his sexual abuse, we survived it. Really, not only survived it, but, you know, I was teaching other people how to survive and running meditation groups and healing groups and doing professional work and doing so well. But what has really tipped both my physical and mental health into a steadily spiraling downhill slide, to the extent that I've been on suicide watch the last 2 weeks, is the severe housing stress and not seeing a way out. And part of what's been really difficult for me in that, a lot of things, is I've been a peace activist all my life. I started as a teenager because my father was violent, and then I was running anti-war and groups as a young student, and then I got into nonviolent communication and meditation and Dharma, that I am so filled with rage, like King Kong type rage, like I want to take out real estate agents and property investors rage. And this is a person who's been training other people in nonviolence and nonviolent social change all her life. And that's really hard to take. But when I'm not feeling angry, I'm really depressed. And I'm finding it harder and harder to find a purpose to live. I tell my purpose to live has always been about my son and about making the future better for others, because I'm really concerned. Personally, I'm involved with HOW, but I'm most concerned about young people. We've got climate change and we've got this effing housing crisis, which has been coming for decades. And, it's just, we're leaving them in a big pile of shit. But anyway, the reason I joined HOW, I'd been looking around for a couple of years, thinking I'm stewing in this depression and rage and anxiety and panic attacks. I have to join a group that's doing something about it. So I spent a couple of years checking out different groups and going to, the Coast to Bay Better Together and Lady Musgrave Trust and this and that and different webinars. And what I found a lot of people talking, but a lot of people didn't have the kind of capacity to sort of really work well together to make change. And when I discovered HOW, and particularly, hats off Maggie Shambrook, Linda Hahn, just absolute heroines of the HOW movement. So I joined HOW because there were people who understood the structural analysis, who could help me. Well, I haven't got past it, but help me move from feeling this incredible sense of shame and personal failure to understanding the structural causes of homelessness and housing stress, well, for anybody, but particularly for older women, to understand it's a gendered issue. And I kind of did understand that. I mean, I was sitting in feminist self-awareness circles at age 19 and then training others. So I kind of was, but all the messages I've been giving myself, which I've been still getting from society and my own family and my friends even, who have got backgrounds in community development, social justice, that somehow this is my fault. So you're already in this really shit situation, and then you're getting this message from society and family that somehow it's your fault. And if you just get it together, you can pull yourself out of this. And so anyway, I joined HOW, which has been fantastic. I have, I think, been very frustrated by my inability to contribute more than I want to, because I'm actually really unwell, and physical health stuff is, normally when I go down into a bad sort of serious chronic fatigue stuff, I know what to do to pull myself out. And it's because I'm in this perpetual stress, like of the housing, I haven't been able to get well again. And for me, who my whole drive is to make a world a better place, I can't tell you how frustrating that is. And if I'd been helped when I was a young single mother with a high needs child to get into secure housing, I would have better physical and mental health. My son would have better mental health. I would have been less a burden on society and made a better contribution, which I still could be. So quite apart from the kind of feel good, we want to get people into housing, it's fucking better for society. It costs less to have well, healthy, productive people, especially people like me who are passionate about making a difference and helping others. So when I got into the housing stuff, I started reading reports and looking at different things like the Australia Institute and other think tanks. There's been reports going back decades about this stuff, saying this is coming. So, the market economy is what's to blame. I mean, we know that. I'm sure most of you know that, like speculating on housing, the whole market economy approach and to wealth creation in Australia is never going to see all of us out. And while we stay with solutions that link to the market, like having so-called affordable housing linked to market price, or having so-called social impact investors being the main platform for social housing, it's not going to work. And at a time when climate change is really screwing our planet, we can't afford to let our young people down, let alone our old people. So, yeah.
Trace.
You need to cut me off. I've probably been
no,
more than 15 minutes.
No, actually, no. Well, we started late. You haven't gone for too long at all. I just wanted to reflect a few of the things that you said. I think that, the fundamental sense when you get, it's a kind of collective feedback from the world around you, the context in which you living your life, and that not being able to be housed, not having access to the right kind of housing that provides security of tenure, so fundamentally impacts the sense of worth. You know, I think especially for women who will internalise what's going on rather than, as you say, necessarily have a clear line of sight to a structural analysis about why we find ourselves in this situation. So I just want to really acknowledge that. And I guess the other thing that really struck me as you were speaking was just how so much can be going on in people's lives while they're still appearing to be, you know, professionally contributing, raising a family in which there is some complexity. And then also, you know, with a child on your hip, trying to make a contribution to the broader community. And I don't think we always see that, you know, how much can be going on while all of those other areas of responsibility and contribution are unfolding as well. So I just want to really, really acknowledge that, and acknowledge how angry and justifiably angry people feel when they are experiencing what you are, and to hear your call that if early secure housing with sustainability and affordability had been possible for you, then this contribution is a benefit to everybody, not just to you and your son. So thank you. And I think everybody, I can see from the chat, so many people just saying words of encouragement to you, Trace. So I'd encourage you to read it for yourself, but I echo those sentiments, and I'm sure everybody else in the session does as well. And there is at this point in the run sheet just a reminder for everyone that it's really sometimes very distressing to be listening to other people's testimony, and it's distressing for Trace too, as we've seen. So I just want to remind everybody that you can reach out to your community of people here, you know, to each other, but also there are places that you can call, like Lifeline and Beyond Blue and 1-800-RESPECT. So please, if you're feeling, you know, distressed by the session at any point, reach out. And I know that there are people who know each other on the call, so that I think friendship is such an important thing. I want to end on a slightly positive reflection, though, that, you know, to hear Trace talk about how she found her community of people who had both a structural analysis and a readiness and a willingness to kind of be working together to do something about that. And the How movement, I think, has had some wonderful successes. So it's such an important reminder. Just in terms of the next session, what an important context in which to now move more to understand about the latest trends from the census data. We're going from the narrative to kind of the evidence base, the research base, that tells us how we're tracking as a community with the challenge of this. And Fiona York from Haag and Wendy Stone from RMIT are going to be speaking. Fiona's the Executive Officer of Housing for the Housing Aged Action Group, and Q Shelter and Haag, of course, have worked closely with the How movement and the department to ensure older women's housing issues are front and centre in policy. So Fiona is very much a part of that. And Professor Wendy Stone from Swinburne University of Technology, she's an academic leader in terms of Housing Futures research program within the Centre for Urban Transitions. And she's currently working with Haag on a research project on older women and homelessness. It's wonderful to have you both, and I really appreciate your contribution. So take us away.
Thank you, Fiona, and hello everybody. Lovely to see so many participants here. I'm joining from Wiradjuri country down in Melbourne. I wanted to acknowledge you, Trace, for that incredible, powerful story, and the weaving together of your experience and awareness of the structural issues, I think, is just such a huge, incredible impact. And to acknowledge your bravery in speaking to a bunch of strangers about something so personal, it's really incredible. Housing for the Aged Action Group has been going since the 80s, and we're really committed to making sure that people who are experiencing the issue get a chance to speak, but we are also aware of how much of an impact that has on the individuals, as well as the movement. But I think connecting stories with data, as we're doing today, and talking to decision makers is absolutely vital in raising it away from an individualistic personal thing into a structural thing that can be changed by people who make the decisions about the policies and where to invest their money. So having said that, today we're presenting some new data that we commissioned through some funding that we received through philanthropy, through the Wicking Trust. And we commissioned some researchers from across the country. We have Professor Wendy Stone today from Swinburne, who's been working with a number of others to crunch the data, to look at what's actually going on behind the numbers. And I won't take up any more of your time, but I'll hand over to Wendy to introduce herself and to talk about the information that she's been able to put together. Over to you, Wendy.
Thank you so much, Fiona, and also thank you to organisers, to Q Shelter, to HAG, of course, who we're working with closely, and to the Housing Older Women's Movement. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging traditional owners of the unceded lands on which I'm coming from, Wurundjeri country in Victoria. I can't move on also without acknowledging the extreme bravery and impact of Tracy, the way you've just spoken to us. It hits all of us, I'm sure, extremely hard. I just reiterating, I suppose, Fiona's comments there. It's listening to you speak, drawing together, pulling together, you know, that your life story so incredibly with us, but joining the dots between what we see in data trends with the real lived experience and the harm and the impact, basically the social harm of systems that are failing people and at increasing rates, failing older people and older women. Thank you so much. This was extremely powerful. So what I'd like to do, I'm just going to work with Fiona here, and Fiona, if you're able to please just start the slides, if that's possible. It's a really different kind of presentation now, from the very personal to the kind of the broad data trend. So in moving, I think we lose quite a lot of the richness, obviously, and the depth of stories and personal impact. But as Fiona was saying, the important part of this type of work that we're doing is trying to understand, well, what is the scale? We know that it's not just one person or one community or one family that experiences these things. So what's the scale? What are the trends and what are the incidents? And that's where this linking up the data, the broader, larger data, national data sets and Queensland data to the stories is so, so powerful for how to understand, how to intervene into this crisis. So thank you so much. I'm going to just say that it was about 7 years ago, the 2016 census data basically showed us that older people, in particular older women, were among the fastest growing homelessness population of experiencing homelessness nationally. And the most recent 2021 census data, homelessness estimates, will be released later this year. We expect the trends to worsen. I don't want to build on the negativity or the hardship side of what Tracy's already presented, because I do think there are some positives to come out in this session today, which is the linking up of this story that I'm also about to present with the policy and service responses. So let's keep that in mind as we go through the trend data. We do expect this to worsen, and this is because extreme outcomes of the type that Tracy's just been speaking to are tip of the iceberg. They arise from not individual failing, but a whole host of changing housing cost and opportunities, shifting demographics, and to a very, very large degree from political choices that are made about how to manage housing in Australia and how to respond to people who cannot live well within the housing options that are available to them at any given time in their life course, including in older age. So we know that growing numbers of people in Queensland appear to be struggling with insecure housing. Rents are increasing, they remain uncapped, and there are low vacancy rates across Queensland. The Anglicare rental affordability snapshots show all of this data. So what does it tell us? So here's the first slide. Slide 2 here shows that basically we have an older population. Queensland is ageing, and this has been worsened in some ways by a sort of COVID migration from other states and territories, even since the data were collected for the census in 2021. We know that there's been an increase in older people in Queensland since the last census. And I'll just go to the next slide as well. We know too that importantly, the kind of structural conditions on which our housing system from the 1970s was built are really disintegrating. Older people are no longer retiring in such numbers or reaching older age, owning their own home. Pension rates are based on the idea that people will not have to pay housing costs. So fewer older Queenslanders are owning their own home outright at that sort of retirement age point. And I'll just go to the next slide. That means that more and more people are retiring or hitting that sort of mid-60s age point with a mortgage. And all of our evidence really indicates that it's very, very difficult for people retiring with a mortgage who experience one or two critical life events of the types of things that we've heard about today. Each one of those begins to whittle down that capacity for people to pay off that mortgage without significant support. I think the cost of living crisis at the moment indicates well and truly that people in mortgage stress also require support to remain housed, because that's a cheaper and much more secure, often safer experience for people in the long run than leaving people to have to leave their home and enter rental housing. So overall, home ownership is not playing the kind of role it has done for older people, and we need to do some rapid policy catch-up within the private rental sectors. So on to the next slide. We know that private rental is becoming a far more significant tenure for many, many people, and in particular for older people as well. And Queensland actually has more older people living in private rental than any other state or territory in Australia. So 13.1% of people aged 55 and over in Queensland are now living in private rental. So this is a really significant change. We know, many of you in the room will know that the private rental regulations that provide security of tenure, longer term leases, rent capping, better housing quality and conditions are a very light touch by international standards. It's really a space that is being responded to around the country, but in different ways, slightly different ways, and at slightly different paces. And in my opinion, and according to the evidence, never in such a way as to provide full security within the private rental sector. The changes we're seeing currently, for example, in Victoria rather, ACT and a few of the other leaders in this space are providing some better regulation for private rental, but it's not enough, especially where vacancy rates are low and landlords, real estate agents, and that sector has a lot of choice about who to let to. So into the next slide, I guess what's staggering is not only the proportion of people who are renting, but the actual sheer numbers, the increase in the people who this affects. So in Queensland, there are over 172,000 private renters aged 55 and over, and that's an increase from around 70,000 a decade earlier. So 70,000 older people. If we take into account rates of increase in the private rental sector demand from people in midlife and people in younger years, all of a sudden we get a picture where not only is there a supply shortage for any given income to rental kind of matching, if you like, but we know at the lowest income or the lowest rent levels, people who are on higher incomes and across different age groups are occupying those lowest cost rentals. So there's also an absolute supply shortage through lack of access and ability to access rental. But we do have this increase. So that's roughly a 71% increase in the numbers of older private renters in Queensland over this period. Thank you, Fiona. So place also matters enormously, and unlike social housing or home ownership, which is relatively fixed in place for at least for a good time, within the private rental sector, we know that in Australia, oftentimes leases or the real experience of rental can be actually a 6-month lease, it can be a 12-month lease. These are short term, and people are being bumped around not only within one location, but from location to location. So we know that what we're seeing in the new data is that the dispersal of private renters across Queensland is increasing, making it really, really difficult for services on the ground, we'll hear about more in the session today, to actually respond in a very timely way to the needs of people who are renting and being moved around from area to area in insecure rental housing. So the implications and the costs for the service sector, as well as for the individuals and people involved in the families, are absolutely enormous. Into the next slide, we can also see that for some particular locations, more such as Logan, Ipswich, Gold Coast, older people are more likely to be renting that in these locations than other older people. So in some locations, rental for older people aged over 55 actually is the dominant tenure form. So that has another set of implications for how to support people on the ground, how to support people in the local area. And also, I guess as our research with HAG progresses, we'll be looking a little bit more at what are the implications of people who come and go from area to area, and how do we respond well to people who are doing that and making those moves in order to cope with housing costs and insecurity. We just go to the next slide, Fiona. So what's particularly worrying in this, I'll just speak to how to understand this slide, that what this slide shows is that lower income households are overrepresented in the private rental sector. That's not surprising, but I'll just talk you through how to understand this. So on the left-hand side with the darkest bar there, which says very low income, if we take all of the household incomes in Australia and we cut them into 5 sections, 5 quintiles, of lowest at the Q1 to the highest is Q5. Q1 incomes are basically representing people whose income is basically almost all made up of income support. Q2 is the next group of people who receive incomes of income support combined with low-waged or casual work, maybe intermittent seasonal work. So we've got those 2 darker bars there, and then the lighter bar is everybody else from the middle incomes up to the highest income earners. And so we see here that older low-income private renters are most at risk of, I guess, or high levels of people live in the private rental sector, and other evidence shows that they're most at risk of homelessness. So if there was proper representation of people across rental and incomes, we'd see that that very low dark bar would actually come up to the 20% mark. Instead, we have 30% roughly of very low income people. Similarly with the next lowest income group. So very low income and low income people accounting for 60% of renters in Queensland, which is really significant. It should be about 40% if the distribution was representative. I hope that's not too boring and technical. Basically, the gist is there are more low income people renting than there should be, and we need to look after them. And into the next slide. So again, the number of people that those percentages represent is substantial. And unlike most other states in Australia, more of the lowest income older renters are actually living in regional, rural and remote parts of the state. So this is another particular challenge, I think, for services responding to the needs of households in Queensland who are becoming very, very dispersed. So Fiona, we'll just go to the next slide. We've started to look at a few of the differences in and among the group of 55 and over renters and other and people living in other tenures and marginal housing, residential parks and so forth. I'm just presenting a couple of snapshots today. So we also know that women are overrepresented amongst the lowest income groups and they're renting for long periods of time. So more older women on the lowest incomes are living in private rental. And here again, we see those significantly overrepresented groups. So just go to the next slide. For Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Queenslanders living in private rental, the numbers are even more significant. We know that there's quite a push nationally among various agencies and various Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities for more empowerment, more autonomy around housing. But the private rental sector at the moment is fraught. Many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here in Queensland, 22% of older Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders living in private rental. But from recent research I've undertaken in the Victorian context, in which we have no reason to believe that the situation is different anywhere else, also talk about the stories of extreme racial discrimination, intersexual discrimination and disadvantage, and just basically having a whole host of access issues. So if we want private rental to be a part of an attainable housing pathway for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, including older people, we really need to open up the access and address those structural barriers and access points, which are really pervasive. I'm just going to sit here for a minute, Fiona, and talk through a couple of brief points before coming to the final slide. So since the census data were collected in 2021, we know that coming out of the most acute COVID period, rents have just spiralled, vacancy rates have dropped, and more people have moved into Queensland from other states and territories. And the consequences are very significant. So as mentioned, the homelessness data will be released later this year, and we'll be working with HAG on reporting that to you. I look forward to doing that. But in the meantime, we know that vast numbers of older people are struggling at the edges of private rental sector, living in substandard housing. We know from our research as well as listening to people like Tracy, who are brave enough and willing to share stories, people are cutting back on food, putting up with and really making incredible trade-offs to live in conditions that are too hot, too cold, unsafe, inadequate, because the structural conditions in the housing system are just not meeting demand, and the market forces are playing a very, very large role in that, and being allowed to by the political decisions to fail to regulate that sector properly. So other qualitative sort of lived stories, lived experience stories that we hear about, in addition to what we've heard today, highlight the fear and the inability of people to raise issues about the quality and conditions of housing they live in, for fear of being asked to leave a property, or for fear that the rent will go up to an even more unaffordable level. Rent is not capped, and we know that that's a particular platform in which some parties are campaigning at the moment to have secure rental, which would mirror the security of some other countries internationally. So thinking about rent security, rent capping, and longer term leases. We know that there are limited policies that actually focus on the pathways for older persons, not just matching people to one asset at a time, so an older person into one dwelling, but actually working with older people to understand what individuals want and need in terms of their planning, understand their case management, really providing a raft of choices in policy responses. And housing aspirations research I've been conducting in recent years, people really talk about lack of housing knowledge, lack of housing literacy, and really not an understanding of where and how to access information and support. So the same research uncovered stories of extreme discrimination against older people, in addition to racial discrimination I've mentioned. So older people really being discriminated against, where we've found reports of real estate agencies not wishing to rent to older people for fear that people wouldn't pay their rent, wouldn't be able to keep up, were taking up the place of a family housing, for example, that could pay more in the market. We'll just go to slide 13, the next one. Just to say that very large part of the problem is that there are fewer and fewer housing alternatives. So social housing in Queensland for older people is around 3% of that 55 and over population, which is incredibly small. It really is not keeping up with the kind of need and demand that we're seeing from a range of people who would be eligible to apply for social housing. And where eligibility criteria are screwed right down, to sort of leave out from the eligibility criteria other people who we know from our research are in extreme need for financial and other forms of assistance. The situation here is really dire. Waiting lists are extreme and access is very, very difficult. We need to really look to other forms of alternatives, including collaborative housing, co-housing and other options. And I guess what we show on the final slide here, I'm really aware of time today. We'll just go to one more slide, which is the last slide. On the policy agenda, we'll hear more now, is that safe, secure housing for people aged 55 and over is the #1 priority that we hear over and over in our research. This is what people need in order to function well in their life and to manage their life and to thrive. And that includes for older people being able to support intergenerationally. So to be able to support adult children, grandchildren and so forth, the kind of snowballing effect of investing well in older people's housing is considerable. Local amenity and service requirements for older people are really high. People wish to stay often in the same location but are being moved around by market forces, and not being able to keep up with those rents. It's critically important that the voices and experiences of diverse groups of older Queenslanders is included in a really genuine policy way in planning of new housing supply and policies. And it's great to have Tracy and other lived experience representatives here today. But that's just one way that people can be represented. Supporting people to feel safe through policy processes is really critical. Basically, the final underlying point to which to end here is basically the need for respecting older people's housing and support needs rather than relying on what basically is a crisis or ambulance approach. Letting people hit rock bottom before helping them is just an inadequate, costly and very, very harmful way to approach housing policy. So we look forward to bringing you more trends and data through the year, and thank you to Fiona and others for the opportunity to speak to some of these early findings. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Look, I'm very mindful of time. I've messaged both of the remaining speakers and we'll just try and kind of reduce the remaining speeches just a little bit in order to allow some time for discussion. But I don't want to glance over the power of that data, especially on the foundation of the narrative and storytelling from Trace. So very, very helpful to see that data. It's very, very challenging picture. So it makes it also really important that we're moving now to both the department and also to Naomi from Footprints to sort of hear about some of the good news, the things that are in play. So I'll pass us on to Chelsea Cousins and Khan to let us know a little bit more about the response and some of the good things that are happening. Thank you. And thanks again, Wendy, really powerful.
Thanks, Fiona. My name is Karen Metz. I'm Director of Private Housing Programs in the Department of Housing, and my colleague Chelsea works with me in the team that specifically looks after the Older Women's Initiative that I'll be talking about today. So Chelsea's in the meeting as well. I just can't see her right now. I'm going to try and keep it short. I wanted to talk about what the department or Queensland Government is doing in this space. As you're probably aware, the department offers or provides social housing, specialist homelessness services, and also some private market products, including Rent Connect, bond loans, rental grants, rental subsidies, etc. However, we do know that the group of older women are falling through the cracks of the service system, and potentially that is due to them not being eligible for social housing, which is something Tracy mentioned before, unable to afford private rental housing, or sometimes also choosing not to access the system as they don't self-identify as being at risk at all. The Queensland government is also highly aware that older women are the fastest group to experience homelessness, and based on the census data, which we just learned, it's quite a steep increase that we're experiencing. So two things the Queensland government has committed to. One is through the Queensland Housing and Homelessness Action Plan 2021 and to 2025, which has committed the government to the development and delivery of housing with support for older Queenslanders experiencing or at risk of homelessness. And the other one is an election commitment to consider the supply of affordable, accessible, secure and amenable housing for women 45 years and older. So as the first step in addressing the issues and looking at implementing solutions, a sponsor group was formed and comprising of members from the Housing Older Women movement, Sharing with Friends and Q Shelter, to help progress the election committee and the action plan actions. We very much appreciate the opportunity to talk to work with the How movement, who bring the lived experience to any actions and considerations we take forward. The sponsor group co-designed the content and the format of a workshop, which was held in July 21, where we heard from women with lived experience, looked at data and system knowledge, and explored the service gaps. Following the workshop, the sponsor group stayed the course and continued to work with us on developing a program of work that was launched or announced by the Minister in February 2022. And that program of work consists of 5 pillars that I'll outline as fast as I can. The information about the 5 pillars and the work that we're doing in this space is on our website. We have a flyer. I'm also happy to channel it through this group and send it out to the participants. The most important pillar that underlines everything, is the foundation for our program, is our advisory and monitoring group, which we call the AMG. The AMG was established in June 22, and it's set up to assist the department with monitoring the implementation of the housing initiatives. So that's the other 4 pillars I'll be outlining. The membership of the AMG consists of the How representatives from the How movement, Q Shelter, Sharing with Friends, and we also have membership specifically for an older woman with lived experience from First Nations and also a cold background. So the work that this group is overseeing includes the specialised housing and support hub, which I understand Footprints will give us probably a more in-depth overview of what they're doing, but that's really a cornerstone of our initiatives. The government invested a total of $5.4 million over 4 years to establish the service as a single entry point for older women to access information and services, to secure affordable and appropriate housing. The next pillar is around housing and support services that the department offers, and a review. So the department has committed to undertaking a services review And that includes looking at all of our products that we provide, and assessing them in terms of eligibility, prioritization approaches, service enhancements, including improved integration, awareness raising, staff training and development, identification of service gaps and potential opportunities, potential product and service packaging, and use in local place-based responses. So that's a piece of work that we're currently undertaking. As you can imagine, it's quite a complex piece of work, but we're working through that and seeking input from the AMG, but at some point we want to take that further and consult with a broader group of stakeholders. The next pillar is planning for housing options. The Department of Communities, Housing and Digital Economy is working closely with the Department of State Development, Infrastructure and Local Government and Planning to explore opportunities to improve planning settings that will grow the supply of social and affordable housing. Then pillar number 5 is the design and construction. Under the Queensland Housing Investment Growth Initiative, which we call QHIGI, the department will deliver 2 projects as a proof of concept for new social and affordable housing for older women specifically. And that's based on learnings from other demonstration projects that we've already done. We will also seed fund an appropriate organisation to design an innovative private housing development that showcases affordable housing for older women, and also co-design and publish an agreed set of housing design principles for older women, for older people generally, but also for older women. The department has design principles as it is, and tries to incorporate as much as possible feedback from older people. But until we've had this group set up, we haven't really had the input specifically for older women, which we've had a wonderful opportunity not too long ago to work with some architects and have input from the How movement, other stakeholders around the needs of older women specifically in designing a complex. So that's in a nutshell the work that we're doing in Queensland Government. Happy to take questions later if that's Fiona. I know that you're strapped for time.
Karen. Yeah, thank you very much, Karen. And Karen and Naomi have both responded by adjusting their presentations, and I know it's important. This material is so important, but I really do appreciate that. And thank you for your time and effort. Naomi, would you like to come in now and provide a bit more of a deep dive on what the new service is offering? And then we're going to open it up to questions. So please be putting questions and comments into the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona, and hello, everyone. I'm just like to let you know I'm speaking from Kabi Kabi, Jinnaburra and Turrbal country this morning, and I'd like to start by acknowledging our traditional custodians. I'd also like to acknowledge those, I'm just going to share my screen, sorry. I'd also like to acknowledge the support we have through HARG to support the establishment of the program from the How movement and the passion of these inspiring ladies to have older women considered for specialised supports, and the Queensland Government for funding a statewide program where a key gap in services has been identified. And thank you to Tracy Adams for sharing your story. Just completely moving and touching, and drives our passion to make sure we deliver the best service that we can for vulnerable women in Queensland. And also thank you to Q Shelter and HARG for running this event. So Footprints has been supporting older people experiencing housing stress for over 30 years and has included various funding and programs. We had the HACC funding for our homeless option program and resident support program, who supported people over the age of 18 who are in insecure housing situations or were homeless. When NDIS was introduced, these clients were supported to access NDIS or access Queensland Community Support, so QCSS. At the moment, alongside the HOUSE program, which is Housing Older Women Support Service, we have the Homeless Outreach Service in the Redlands community, and we also have the SUSO mobile support bus with Sharon Laundry that covers Moreton Bay and down into the Redlands region. Our services provide wraparound support with case managers to work alongside people with the aim to achieve positive housing outcomes. We've also have mental health programs that provide specialised support through long-term case management, working with people experiencing homelessness with complex mental health diagnosis. A theme weave through all Fit Footprints programs is our support to the most vulnerable and isolated in the community, with homelessness and housing stress being a recurrent theme of need. I acknowledge the challenging nature individuals experiencing housing stress or homelessness face today, the confusing systems of large referral processes and eligibility criteria into various services and programs. And that's why programs such as HOUSE are crucial, providing long-term holistic support that adopts a true trauma-informed care approach to a growing and extremely vulnerable cohort. So our vision for the Housing Older Women Support Service is that all women over the age of 50 or First Nations women over the age of 45 can access secure housing. So this service is underpinned by connection with each other, connecting people to resources and connecting the sector, including private real estate and corporate, into the achievement of positive outcomes. We are working at connecting local communities in a common cause, and we are seeing this happen as we extend our service statewide, with services wanting to engage and work collaboratively with us. So our program has basic eligibility: First Nations women over 45, non-Indigenous women over 50 experiencing homelessness or housing stress. We offer a statewide intake and referral service, and we have dedicated intake workers at the end of a phone, at the end of an email inquiry, Facebook, our website. We have many ways for people to access our service. And so the support includes information and navigation to support any warm referrals that we can make through to other into regional services. In connection, we follow up with people, and it's also a point of contact for people who require less intensive support. As we deliver our services, we're recognising that we need to change as we're seeing a massive increase of demand as people find out about our service. So we're constantly reviewing and looking at better ways in which we can support the community. So we've also implementing another level of support through casework and coaching, because our housing case management is just seeing such a high demand. Because as you heard with Tracy's story, there are many complexities to the women who are accessing our service. We also provide community education engagement through our community engagement officers, and they provide education on how to manage, work out the service navigation, and it includes facilitation of community and professional education sessions to support, educate and reduce stigma provide pathways and engage local communities to provide key sessions to women, sector development in the form of training. And that's we have our main hub in Brisbane, commencing that through the Southeast Queensland region. We also work closely with lived experience. We offer co-facilitation of education through the support at the hub and throughout navigation and ongoing reference groups. And this includes women with lived experience from all backgrounds. And all our service delivery is underpinned by lived experience and trauma-informed care. So currently, our service model, we have a main website, which is house.org.au. And this provides information on how women can navigate and services can navigate the different services in the region. This is being updated regularly as we are getting more information about what's available to women. It provides information around service navigation and how to link into our events that aren't just face-to-face, but online and multiple access points. Our main hub is in Brisbane at our West End office. We have a beautiful, you might be able to see the picture. We have a beautiful hub that women can access Monday to Friday. There's always a welcome vibe, a cup of tea, biscuits, safe place for women to access. This week, we have just opened our first regional spoke in Mackay, with Atherton commencing in mid-March. In Mackay, we are co-locating with the Greater Whitsunday Community, which is an organisation, and in Atherton, we'll be co-locating with Better Together Community Support. Our organisations all align with our values, services and projects we deliver and the passion to the communities we support. We're yet to announce our official launches, so we'll do that in due course. We are really proud to have aligned and co-located with these organisations because these organisations stood out to us as understanding the issues that their communities are facing, and they have spaces that are known in the area and particularly accessible to women. So House started to accept referrals from the 3rd of October, being officially opened by the Minister for Communities, Housing and Digital Economies, the Honourable Leanne Enoch, on the 17th of October. So far, we have supported 196 women, and we have supported 51 women through case management just in the Southeast Queensland region alone in that 5 months. However, we do currently have a wait list of 70 plus for case management. So this is really demonstrating the great demand and need for a program like House to get up and running and be in the community. What we're seeing is 63% of those accessing the services are aged between 45 to 64. I'm so sorry. I'm losing my voice. 22% are 65 to 71 years and 11% are 72 to 79 years, with 5% being aged over 80. The housing situation at referral is mainly spread between 3 recording points. So insecure is 5%, which is women being in refuge in boarding houses, hostel or rooming accommodation. So that's what we'd consider insecure. Primary homeless is 36% of the women that we're seeing come through. So women who at the time of referral or inquiry are living in their car, caravan, tent or couch surfing. And then 47% are in private rentals that are unaffordable and unsustainable. which our role is to try and support a sustainment of those tenancies or find a potential solution before they move into that primary homelessness phase. You can also see a location breakdown, which covers, that's just a snapshot of Southeast Queensland at the moment, but as we grow statewide and start sharing more information and services find out about us, we expect the numbers to represent most communities across Queensland. As you can see, there's also some main issues faced by older women: financial issues, security and stability, no services in their region, health issues, domestic and family violence, housing demand. Main barriers that we're hearing are rent affordability within hospital catchment areas, appropriate options for and challenges to accessing services for women who are First Nations, refugee, COLD, LGBTIQ+. We have a smaller percentage of women who currently access the service who identify as First Nations, and we're just starting to get some good link-ins with wider community First Nation services and groups to consult how we can engage with First Nations and housing vulnerable women. The greater community having a lack of understanding of risks and issues for older women who are facing homelessness, and ageism in the private real estate sector. The challenges that House is experiencing as a program, bear in mind we're only in service for 5 months, our waitlisting clients. So as our demand grows, we're constantly evolving how we deliver our service so we can meet this need. Meeting the needs of all the regions. So Queensland's such a large and regionally diverse area. We're delivering a statewide intake and referral service, and we're just implementing a casework level in that statewide service. We also have regional spokes opening in areas where there has been data supporting a high demand. And we've also had consultation and feedback from communities where there's a definite gap in the services in that region. And we're meeting the expectations of services referring into House. So what we're finding is that being a new service, just that constant education to the wider sector and regular consistent messaging through networking about what our service can actually provide, and just myth busting in the community around what homelessness looks like. And of course, limited housing options. So we are being creative in how we look at appropriate, affordable and safe housing for our client demographic. Older women who cannot afford private rentals on their own, with landlords and real estate agents leaning towards dual income occupancy, there's a limited availability for social and community housing options. So we're working really closely to develop MOUs and partnerships with like-minded community housing providers and regional services. And so far we've been working with Coast to Bay, Better Together Housing, the Mangrove Housing, Jacaranda Housing, and there's some private landlords out there that are aware and empathise with the older women as this issue comes further to light. So moving on to a case study.
Naomi, can I just, we've just only got a few minutes left.
Okay,
So I'm wondering,
I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. If you could maybe wrap up in 1 or 2 minutes, I'd like to just make a little bit of space. And I do apologise to you because we lost a bit of time at the beginning and I feel very responsible for that. So
no,
thank you.
That's okay. We do have good case studies coming through. Things that I just want to identify what's next for us as we grow, looking at ways, like Tracy said, early intervention education to younger generations. And really important is documenting women's stories. So I'd just like to end on this good news story. And this was to our coordinator, Hayley, about one of our amazing case managers, Kylie Lowe. I've had the privilege of having Kylie as my facilitator for the past few months, as she has tried to find accommodation for me with my special needs. Kylie has been an inspiration and a real joy to work with. Her knowledge, her energy, her enthusiasm, and her supreme efforts to help me have been very appreciated. She is a great advocate for footprints, and any client who has her as their facilitator is blessed. I have now found a unit at Peachtree through Brick, and just wanted to pass on my thanks for Kylie and Footprints for the wonderful service you provide for older women. I would appreciate you passing these comments on to Kylie from Lola. So thank you, everybody. Any questions at the end?
Thanks, Naomi. I'm going to go, I've been looking at the chat. There's a question here about Airbnb or similar short-term rentals. Is there any lobbying to address this as well as addressing rental caps? So I know I can speak for Q Shelter that the Queensland Housing Summit did hear a lot about the rent rises, but also the impact of short-term rentals on the broader private rental market. There is an investigation of the impacts of short-term rentals on the broader rental market being undertaken by, I think, the Department of State Development as part of the Housing Summit. Our follow-up, so we'll be keeping a close eye on that, and certainly our policy recommendations to government are that there are interventions to prevent short-term rentals impacting the supply of longer-term housing. There's a lot of reflections on how important it is that data like this and the narrative provided by Trace brings more focused effort together to kind of address those needs because of the extent of those, and people from other regions also affirming that the discussion points are certainly being felt in their regions, such as the Gold Coast. There's a question here from Isaac Hunter to Wendy in terms of what the census data shows about median affordable rent for the cohort, potentially based upon income and affordability thresholds. Is that something that you have analysed? So what is median affordable rent for this particular group?
Yeah, thanks so much, Isaac. Thank you for Fiona, and to all the speakers. And I'm sorry if I've contributed to the time squeeze. This is actually work that we're doing now. So we're looking at the affordability data. Census data, if you remember from filling out the census form, is pretty general. It's pretty clunky. So it gathers data about income ranges, and that's really hard to work with when we want to get down to really precise information about affordability. So we're using Bureau of Statistics Survey of Income and Housing to look at what is affordable income and rent rather for incomes across different cohorts of older people, and that will be coming out through some other work we'll be publishing with HAG during this year. So please keep an eye out on that. That's really important, and we understand that the regional variation is something that is becoming very, very prominent and something we want to be reporting on.
Thanks so much, Wendy. And so there's obviously going to be more opportunities to hear about what that data tells us. I have got a question here, or a comment from Maggie. What are the immediate low-hanging fruit system changes we could campaign for in the next 12 months in particular? It's a great question to kind of get close to the end on. What else should we be seeking to achieve and change? I'm happy to take comments in the chat. So Maggie's further question, what models do you think could make a difference that are scalable and replicable?
I'm happy to comment briefly if no one else wants to dive in. I think there are multiple things that need to happen. There's no silver bullet here. It's such a complex housing system, and the interaction of the housing system with other parts of our lives and welfare supports. So one of the lowest hanging fruit, in my opinion, is immediate strengthening up of regulation of the private rental sector. It is only one part of the picture of securing housing, but making sure that people can access longer term leases, and can have decent housing quality and conditions is really important. It's possible to work with existing infrastructure housing that already exists on the ground at the same time that we wait for new supply. So the private rental sector, in my opinion, is urgent and pretty low-hanging fruit.
Thanks for that, Wendy. And certainly, I know on the policy agenda for Q Shelter, exactly those things you've said we suggested. And there's a suggestion here from Richard Andrews to increase rental assistance now as well. There's a number of links in the chat, one from Fiona York, for example, about getting involved in campaigning on these issues. And there's also a number of other links. I think what we will undertake to do is make sure all of the post pack to the participants includes the links and suggestions and questions as well. So Neil, I appreciate your comment about the importance of early intervention in providing housing so that people are not homeless for long, and it's certainly really critical to think about what upstream measures look like in terms of a healthy housing system, making sure people have the assistance that they need quickly. It's a concern to hear that the new service is already having to think about waitlisting clients. But what I'd like to say to absolutely everyone is that, you know, out of great appreciation for Footprints, who's doing an outstanding job, it's really important that the referrals keep flowing, because if we double guess that there's no capacity in a service, then we don't see people reaching for what they need, and it doesn't get better for them, and it certainly doesn't get better for any of us who are trying to figure out what are the next steps in terms of resources and responses that are needed. So I would hope everyone takes away from today the need to keep facilitating people's access to this new service, and then we can all be working together to kind of use data to kind of continue to have the conversation about how we resource the response. I think it's called pressure up rather than pressure down. Sometimes we accidentally put pressure down on people seeking help by kind of thinking that there's not enough capacity to help. So I'm sure my colleagues in the department would agree. We want to see that demand come forward and keep working on improved responses to support Footprints in the delivery of the service, but also everyone else involved in other touch points. Another comment here is the department reviewing how older women come into the system and how they're assessed. I know that some good work was done to kind of improve and strengthen the eligibility of older women seeking support and assistance through the Department of Housing. Karen, I don't know if you want to respond to that one. Is there anything else at the point of triage that would help more older women get access to services and products?
So that's part of our service review that I mentioned before, that where we're looking at, a series of aspects. But also, I just want to mention there was a comment in increasing the rental, making it easier to access. So the government, as a result of the summit, also increased the private rental income limits. So they previously were set at 60%. They've been increased to 65%. And I know that is not, the world, but it is, a step forward in making it easier for people to access our private rental products.
Thank you for that. There's a number of comments here about the importance of rental reforms. So I think, for Q Shelter, that's also just really helpful to have those critical things affirmed as part of the policy framework. And I see here a comment as well about local government legislation about multiple occupancy. There's a whole raft of reforms about planning systems and local government that are really, really important. And that's not to say that we want to see local governments playing the role of state or federal governments. That's not the case, but they have these important levers through the planning system and through planning schemes and through other regulatory aspects of housing at the local government level. Pauline Coffey here making the point about the impact of the Olympics. Q Shelter's written a significant report, put a lot of resources into a report with a blueprint for how the Olympics could prevent displacement, but also achieve a housing and homelessness response as part of the legacy. And we continue up until even the last few days, really trying to push those ideas out through the legacy planning process. I think everyone can play a role in saying how we want no negative impacts of the Olympics on housing, and we certainly, you know, want to see a housing legacy come from the Games itself. I'll just take one or two more to make sure they hit the ether. Naomi's really affirming the point, don't stop coming to the service. I think it's a really big one. And, you know, the broader idea of upstream and preventative measures for those younger women who might be able to, you know, be supported to change their trajectory towards a longer term, more sustainable result as they age. So some people are needing to leave the meeting. Of course, we've reached time, a few minutes over. I do want to sincerely thank all of the speakers. It was such a well-rounded designed program, which I had nothing to do with, I have to say. This is all HARG and other members of the Q Shelter team, and certainly the Housing Older Women movement. Narrative and story backed by really, really interesting and important data. Then to round off with the responses from both the state government and the new emerging service with Footprint to give us that sense of things are happening, but Maggie's critical question, how do we continue to craft some solutions for the next 12 months, the kinds of things we can be advocating for to continuously improve what's happening in this space. We will, you know, take the chat and all of the links that people have provided, all important sources of information and further analysis, and make sure that the people who've been part of the session get access to that. I see a hand up from Patricia. Patricia, we don't really have much time left, so if you have a comment that you want to make, I'm really happy to take it, and then we'll close the session off. I don't think we can. Sorry.
Oh, hello,
Hi.
I'm Stephanie.
Hi, Patricia.
This is Patricia with me here.
Hello, Patricia.
And Mum's in a space where she's going to is looking for housing at the moment, and it's tough. I was just quite surprised that the government would allow 65% of our very small income to go on to living expenses, to go on to just rent. How on earth is the extra 35 meant to keep us through? You know, I mean, I recall it used to be 30%. When did that change so dramatically?
So it hasn't, I mean, the affordability definitions have not changed. What's happened is that people are required, you know, if they're in the private rental market or, you know, whatever the housing products beyond social housing, it can be more than 30% of your income on rent. Patricia, I'd really like to go offline and touch base with you and talk further about your own circumstances, and perhaps we can think about, you know, what kind of follow-up would assist you individually. But a very important point that people are pushed way out of the affordability definition. And I just want to acknowledge that that's the call to action, isn't it? That so many people are paying so much that they can't afford life's simple pleasures. Even if we were talking about the things you can do to enjoy life more, it's those essentials as well, of course, most importantly, that people can't afford. So with that call to action and with Maggie's question, what in the next 12 months do we need to define as our progress of this work? And I just want to thank everybody again, all of you for participating, for contributing to the chat, and the post pack will include some important links and further follow up. Thank you, everybody.